Okay, I'm ready.
Ready?
Yeah.
Alrighty. The recording is already started, and like I said, I'll end up editing and deciding what 1 to 2 minutes I'd like to share with the professor. Alrighty, so building an ethical organization, and my subtitle for this is Breaking Achievement Barriers. The focal point of this notion of ethical behavior are the paradigms of the ethic of justice, the ethic of critique, the ethic of care, and also the ethic of profession. This task particularly challenges me to be more reflective in my approach in my role as assistant principal of instruction, the API, for the school. In this activity, we could have selected uh, to look at the role of principal or any other role that we might decide to aspire to. But I wanted to stay in the moment of the work that we're doing. So you'll see that I'm examining my practices in the PLC, the content PLC. And my goal is just to ensure that we actually experience these expected outcomes of increased student achievement based on what we are using to drive our instructions and ensuring that they are, in fact, good decisions. So my overall question to myself is, do my leadership practices employ data-driven decision making, or is my professional growth pushing the team to a more effective evidence-driven practice? Now research is talking more about, we've used the adage data driven instruction for so long, but now research is now focusing more on what does the evidence say, considering that most of us believe we can make data say whatever we want it to. The backbone of this is looking at personal ethical behavior. And I contend that how we behave, our professional ethics has everything to do with our values. I believe that every child deserves equal access to learning opportunities despite their inherited starting point. Therefore, as I consider what I am doing specifically for my own professional development, I'm looking more closely at three particular things: the value of integrity, emotional intelligence, and the commitment to evidence-based decision making. One of the researchers, Christie, surmises integrity as that piece of the puzzle that gives meaning to the work that we do. Something that is very important to me as a leader is that, as what Johnson calls an ethical officer, I want to ensure that the standard of my work is what legitimizes my authority and not the title of my position. Leadership integrity is characterized in these 5 elements that are shown on the screen. You see the wholeness, consistencies of practice, morality, ethics, how we behave in the face of adversity. Okay. Another important point I want to make is that I believe sustained behavior requires habitual attention. If we are reflective practitioners, that means we're constantly looking at the whys of what we do. And one of the important pieces of this presentation is to ensure that we as leaders don't fall into what is called the dark side of leadership, in which we become more rigid in our focus, or where we are not truly investing in the work, but we become more self-centered leaders. So one of the things that, as I said before, I'm focusing on is emotional intelligence, recognizing that emotions in our work can cause us to lack rationality. Not that we cannot be emotional beings. Of course, we cannot detach ourselves fully from emotions, but recognizing that if we indulge in our emotions, then we have the potential to limit our objectivity. We can become irresponsible in our practice. because then we can start looking more at personal interests instead of looking at what is ethical, which is the greater good of the organization and the work. And also, if we lack emotional intelligence, then when things don't go the way we desired them to go, we'll shift into the blame game instead of the responsibility game. My other focus is on making good decisions. And what does that look like? The characteristics of ethical and good decisions are that the decision is supported by evidence, that the ends aimed at are by the right decision making are the right ends. That decisions can be implemented morally and also legitimately achieved. So one of my goals is to look at how do we create in our teams an ability to ensure that we are staying ethical in our practice by using this means ends reasoning of design. Now on your screen, you see the ethical team. This is extremely important to me because, as I said before, we already have so many things in place. It's just that we're not looking at necessarily looking at, is this about ethics or what is this about? This project makes me say this is about ethics. So the ethical team that I'm focusing on, as I said before, is the PLC team, and where I consider my greatest influence as an instructional leader. What I have created is the Work Group Facilitator Cabinet, which you are aware of. The Work Group Facilitator Cabinet is composed of 1 to 2 teacher leaders from each of the core content areas. The reason I selected this team is because I also believe that at our school, our content PLC is the strongest one we have in the building. It's the one that we have invested the most amount of time in. And if we look at how we have developed the content team, I believe that whatever rubric we put in front of us as to gauge the effectiveness of that team, every practice that is required in an effective PLC, we already have in place. So again, in this work group facilitator cabinet, we have 1 to 2 teacher leaders. Another thing that I think is important about the leaders I selected is that they have varied years of experience. They have varying instructional styles. They range in their use of data, and all of them have strong relationships within their team. The common quality, though, amongst them is that if I were to look at all of them individually, each of these people could be considered a model teacher in at least three of the 10 teacher key standards. With this ethical team, though, my role is as a coach. I am looking at myself as the coach and the work group facilitators being the coaching staff, if you will. They are what I'm calling ambassadors for effective collaboration and effective cooperative groups. As you can see on your screen now, research says that effective cooperative groups retain more information, they engage in higher level reasoning, more critical thinking, they generate more creative ideas, tactics, solutions, and because of them, we have more of a transference of learning from the group to individuals. So when we invest in this teaming, we are investing wholeheartedly into the collaborative work of the school. As a coach, I host, one of the things that I do is I host the weekly, what I call the work group facilitator huddle. And this is to foster this ethical accountability. Students are the core of all decisions. Therefore, the huddles are our open discussion of any of these following things: content expectations, data trends, celebrations of progress. For example, in our very first meeting, it was determined that, hey, in some of our content meetings, we don't even walk away with a lesson plan. So on week 2 of content planning, we celebrated that the language arts department was finally coming away with a plan, not just with talking about tasks. We talk about response to resistance. One of the things in looking at an ethical organization is all the different barriers, destructive behaviors that come up in our organization that we as leaders cannot pretend are not there. We're going to have the dark side of leadership. We're going to have the dark side of our work. So we have to talk about resistance within our PLC, as well as that collaborative focus for the week. Now we move to just looking at what is building this ethical organization looking like. As I said, we have an organization in place because the so much attention has been put in these last 8 years to the culture of the school. We're not at a starting point here. Okay, so the analogy that I've used is just as a homeowner signs a covenant with a homeowners association to commit to the greater good of the community, so shall stakeholders in a school organization. While the principal is the leader of the school organization, my role as an assistant principal is an essential player to the implementation and the communication of standards of ethical climate and ethical culture. Researcher Sir Giovanni defines covenants as solemn and binding agreements between two or more parties that provide reciprocal rights. These are very important. Duties, obligations on one hand, and guidelines for action on the other. As an ethical leader, I plan to use my influence to ensure that we have clear decision-making processes that connect what is good to what is effective. Here's why that is important. If we consider the chart that I've shown below, when looking at what goodwill is, we can make a moral decision that is ineffective. We can have practices that are in place that we say get good results, but they can be immoral. And so it's very important that the decisions that we are making are both moral and that they are effective. We can't just make decisions haphazardly in our organization. We want to make sure that all of our practices are guided by morality. So I contend that the effective infusion of this ethical team, this cabinet, can make sure that on a greater scale, we have a definitive approach to ethical accountability in all areas of our school organization. As I tie all of this together, I'm looking at what Palestini says in that achieving educational effectiveness is incremental, is sequential, and it's a process. This does not happen overnight. It begins by ensuring that all members, all stakeholders understand their value. And at the heart of all of this as leaders is our relational experience, which is built on trust. One of the things that we have to look at is what will challenge this work. So I contend that the greatest resistors of change will be those that view this approach as more work instead of looking at it as enhanced work or enhanced practice. They will engage in these destructive behaviors that seek to undermine our processes, but the ethical team, which again are our ambassadors for the work, the ethical team they are going to help us with this. At the root of our actions is breaking through these achievement barriers. And understanding that the ethics of justice, which makes us ask the question, is what we're doing lawful? The ethic of critique, which makes us ask questions about, are we consistent? Are we allowing one group's concerns to take precedence over anyone else's? The ethics of care, which I think we sit in all the time, just the concern for how we are making people feel about our decisions, and the ethics of profession. Are we doing what we are required to do as professionals? Every decision that impacts students must pass the ethics test. Is it right? And does it achieve a greater good? And we are done. Thank you so much for your time and your consideration through all of this, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.
Well, thank you, Ms. Warner.
Alrighty, I'm going to stop our recording.